Shay, are you ready? Okay, we're live. Welcome to this beautiful February 22nd, 2021. As you can see, it's just a beautiful day out there, and that's our opportunity as a community to get outside and make sure that we're physically and mentally active. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a agenda before you. Administration, has everything to be added to the agenda?
Your Worship, it's Tom Golden, CAO. At this point, I would ask Lorraine Ellis, our Manager of Legislative Services, to provide, just for the public and for council, a note about the process regarding the closed meeting this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Town Manager, and good evening, Your Worship, and all members of council. As Town Manager mentioned, we just wanted to provide some clarification to any members of the public who may be watching this evening that there will be a closed session item on tonight's agenda. And just to ensure that we achieve any of our legislative requirements, members of the public may email legislative@stonyplain.com. It's up there on the screen as well. If they wish to receive an email notification at the conclusion of the closed session and prior to council returning to the open portion of the meeting. So again, if any member of the public wishes to receive a notification prior to going back into the open portion of the meeting following the closed session, they can send us an email at legislative@stonyplain.com and we'll ensure that that notification is provided.
Thank you much, Lorraine, for the update. Members of council, again, this is a virtual meeting, so please make sure that all mics are muted. And again, text me for speaking orders so that I can have a little list of who's going to speak next. As well, in the past, as is today, our recording secretary will be counting the votes and then lowering the hands after a motion has been called. Okay. So with that, need an adoption of the agenda. Deputy Mayor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the Town Council adopt the February 22nd, 2021 regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Thank you. And I'll call the question. All those in favor, please use your raise hand function.
Mr. Mayor, there's 7 hands in favor.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Move on to number 3, which is the public input session. This is the time that we allow residents to address council on issues or just provide comment on anything that's not on the current agenda. Since this is a virtual format, has anybody submitted anything to be read into the records to the town manager, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. At this time, I would notify council that we have not received any submission from the public to speak at the public input session.
Okay, thank you much, Town Manager. So move on to number 4 is presentations and delegations, and today we have 2. The 4.1 is the appointment of the Deputy Mayor. Again, this is, we do this every 1, 2, 3, 4 months, I believe. I have to use my fingers, yes. So I need a motion, please, from Councillor Bennett, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Town Council appoint Councillor Bruce Loy as Deputy Chief Elected Official for the term of February 22nd, 2021 to June 30th, 2021, or until the appointment of the next Deputy Chief Elected Official.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. And just wanted to, before we move on to call the questions, want to thank Deputy Mayor Justin Laurie for his work over the last 4 months. Thank you very much. Sitting in for meetings for me and also attending a couple of things that I could not attend. I definitely appreciate that. Councillor Loy, I look forward to your work in the next 4 months. It could be busy and it could not be busy. We don't know that with the way things are going and the fact that everybody wants a Zoom meeting now because we can book them back to back without driving. You might be busy with that. Just for everyone's kind of FYI, Deputy Mayor, well, soon after, Councillor Lloyd came in earlier today, and we did the swearing in council chambers earlier today so that we don't have to kind of run this kind of virtually. So the papers are already signed, so hopefully this motion does pass. If not, I guess we keep Deputy Laurie for a little longer. So with that, I call the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, there's 7 hands in favor.
Thank you very much, and that motion has passed. So Deputy Mayor Loy, congratulations, and make sure you have some good walking shoes. There'll be a lot of events and stuff that you need to do on my behalf. Members of Council, moving on to 4.2 is a presentation from the TransAlta Tri-Leisure Center, and this is in regards to the 2020 operating deficit. As we're all aware, we're currently facing a global pandemic, and that has caused the TLC to shift and pivot to where they are today. They did do a presentation a few months ago, and now they're just doing an update as the deficit has been finalized. So I believe there's a couple members of the board and the general manager and the finance manager has joined us. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please ask you to turn on your mics and your video when you're presenting, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. Appreciate the time on your agenda this evening to share the details of our operational deficit in 2020, which saw a significant increase over the initial projections that I shared with you back in September when I came and presented the 2021 budget, as well as the COVID-19 response update. I will be sharing my screen here shortly and walking us through the presentation. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce others who are joining me this evening. First, Daniel Beaton, who is our board chair and Spruce Grove public member. Jerry George, our vice chair and Stony Plain public member, as well as Kathy Sadek, our finance supervisor. While I'll be doing the majority of the presenting this evening, Daniel, Jerry, and Kathy may provide additional info or responses to questions that council may have. As you're all aware, the TLC operates on a cost recovery model in which self-generated revenues in the 2020 budget were approximately 78%, with the balance being shared by the 3 owner municipalities. As a result of COVID-19, the TLC was closed to the public from March 15th to July 6th, and again from December 19th to 31st, and of course that carried on into 2021 into the early month of January. The initial closure ceased the ability to generate these revenues, which include corporate sponsorships, memberships, drop-in charges, facility rentals, and our tenant rent. Upon reopening, and for the balance of the year, provincial restrictions continue to impact membership retention and return, program registrations, and facility rentals. As an example, the pause on team sports in November that was unexpected resulted in a decrease of approximately $130,000 in revenues, which was not anticipated at all. Further impacts were felt on our tenants, who remained closed even after we were permitted to reopen due to limited traffic flow and impacts of provincial restrictions on their operations themselves. Following the initial closure, and once it was clear that this closure would be for an extended period of time, administration took steps to reduce expenses as much as possible while maintaining the ability to be responsive and open as quickly as possible and was permitted, which was the direction of the TLC Board of Directors. The measures included staff layoffs. We laid off 150 part-time and contract staff, 9 permanent full-time and permanent part-time unionized staff members. A further reduction of 11 out-of-scope staff were reduced to half-time, with 5 staff being retained at full-time. The staff retained planned for various scenarios of reopening, development of provincially required plans and updated documents around our safety and operations, and guided a variety of capital projects which were completed while the facility was closed to avoid further disruptions in service later on. Materials and supplies budgets were significantly reduced, with essential purchases being permitted through to the end of the year. Training and travel budgets were frozen to the end of the year. A reduction in custodial and security contracted services, even upon reopening, were further changes made. And additionally, operating hours were reduced through to the end of the year, with a more significant impact in the summer months. Important to note, sorry, as I just jump ahead, expenses to year end were at 66.37% of our original budget. As part of our initial planning after the closure, a variety of scenarios were explored, ranging from 3 to 5 month closures. And of course, back then, we really didn't have any idea as to when we'd be able to reopen. The initial budget forecast showed a potential deficit of $400,000 at that time. The aforementioned expense reductions were implemented and continued to be refined to get the deficit down as much as possible. When I was here in September, we anticipated the deficit to be in the $60,000 to $100,000 range, which, all things considered, we felt was quite reasonable considering the impact on our revenues. That being said, between September and the end of the year, saw significant and unanticipated changes in this amount. This was primarily due to a couple of factors. One was our membership return rate. As you know, one of our main areas of revenue generation is from our memberships, drop-in fees, monthly passes, and those types of admissions. Initially, based on our discussions with our members, email communication as to when the memberships would be reactivated, we anticipated a return rate of about 80%. Unfortunately, at the end of October, when the first round of payments were withdrawn and members continued to either pause their membership further or cancel, that number became 55% rather than the 80% we had initially projected. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, provincial restrictions, particularly those that paused team sports in November, saw a significant impact of approximately $130,000 in revenues. Further impacts on our tenant rent due to significantly reduced traffic and ability for patrons to eat and drink and visit those establishments as per usual. While we qualified for and received funding from the federal government for rent, it resulted in less than projected revenue being received. We worked with our tenants to come to an agreeable amount to be paid rather than lose them outright, which was a realistic possibility at the time. Additionally, we did explore the opportunity to apply for other federal grants and provincial grants, and because of our being owned by municipal government, we weren't eligible for the vast majority of those grants. However, we did access all the grants that we were able to, that we were eligible for. At the end of the year, and having said all of that, and after our audit was completed, the final deficit for the year was $503,037, which is a slight tweak from the original package I'd presented. So your slide shows a slightly different number of 531. That's because our audit hadn't been completed when I had to submit the documents. So the final deficit was just over $503,000. In looking at our reserves that the TLC has, the Memorandum of Agreement outlines in Article 7.5 two reserves that the TLC has currently, an operations reserve and a capital reserve. In a year which sees a surplus, portions of that surplus are placed into both of these two reserves based on a formula. The operations reserve, as it is defined in the MOA, is to be used to fund future deficits of the corporation, while the capital reserve is intended to be used to offset future capital purchases. To this point, the capital reserve sits at $907,000, of which $250,000 was committed to the lighting upgrade project. The full amount will not be required, and it is estimated that approximately $100,000 of that will be returned to the reserve once the project is completed. The operation reserve, which is more of a flow-through account for operations, capital purchases, and depreciation management, was at $601,000 at the end of 2020. This amount fluctuates from year to year, depending on a number of factors. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Kathy, who is our finance supervisor, to explain a little bit more about the operations reserve in a little bit greater detail.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon and welcome. We can hear you.
Sorry, there we go. So I'm just going to give you just brief short summaries on the reserves that we hold, hoping that everyone will have a good understanding of how these reserves work. And I'm going to start with the equity and tangible capital assets, which is basically a reserve, but we have tangible assets in this reserve. There's no debt associated with the acquisition of these assets, and the equity in the capital assets is exactly equal to the total net book value of assets at December 31st. And the balance in the tangible capital assets only change when we purchase equipment and record depreciation expense. So if we have a higher depreciation value than the amount of the capital assets, then that equity is reduced. If we have lower depreciation than we have purchased capital assets in the year, then that equity increases. The restricted surplus accumulates each year based on the requirement in the MOA with the 3 municipalities to restrict 50% of the surplus in excess of $25,000 each year. These funds are restricted for future use and typically a board motion required in order to access the use of funds. And normally, if the Tri-Leisure was requesting to use any of the restricted surplus funds, it would come in the form of a budget request. The budgets require approval of the TLC board, the council of the town of Stony Plain, Spruce Grove, and Parkland County. The unrestricted surplus is the resulting balance of the changes in the tangible capital assets and the restricted surplus. The definition be that the unrestricted surplus is for future use, provided that the use is in compliance with any legal purpose of the center. And so based on the MOA, again, any surplus up to $25,000 should be used to fund future deficits of the center. In addition to the balance in excess of $25,000 is split 50-50 between the unrestricted or operating and restricted or capital. And in the year ended December 31st, there's a deficit of $503,000 that directly reduces the balance of the unrestricted surplus, as there was a significant decrease in the operations. This resulted in the opening unrestricted surplus being reduced from $601,000 in the beginning of 2020 to $98,000 at the end of 2020. And just a fact I'd like to state is that the bank balance at the end of the year was approximately 1.7 million. And so at the moment, both of these surpluses, restricted and unrestricted, are fully funded. And there is no risk at this point in time of going into a negative position. However, we look forward to 2021, where we are diligently working again on reducing expenses, trying to increase revenue flow, and hoping to end the year in a positive situation. Now, if anyone has any questions specifically, I will try to answer them. And if I don't have the information at hand or right at the moment, I'm happy to prepare an answer and get back to you at any point in time.
Thank you, Kathy. So the board of directors have approved the use of reserves to fund the operating deficit from 2020 and have directed administration to seek approval from the 3 municipal councils, which is required by the MOA, as our budget needs to be approved by all 4 parties. At this point, I'm going to provide 3 options for council's consideration, along with the recommended option, which we feel is the most appropriate. Option 1 is to fund the full deficit from the operating reserve, which Kathy alluded to just a few minutes ago. This option results in no impact on the capital reserve, leaving it intact for the upcoming capital and infrastructure projects in the years ahead. Additionally, there is no further impact on the municipalities at this current time. The lone drawback to this option is the potential of ending up in a deficit position in the future, which Kathy alluded to. This has only occurred once in the history of the TLC, in 2010 when the deficit was $65,500, and at that time the municipal governments decided to fund it separately and above and beyond their municipal contribution. The second option would see a splitting of the deficit between the operations and capital reserves. This option would result in less funding for future capital and infrastructure, however, would reduce the potential risk of the operations reserve winding up in a deficit position. The third and least likely of options is for the municipality to fund the deficit by providing additional funding. While this option is possible, it is the least favorable, and given the state of reserve, simply is not required at this point in time. TLC's administration, along with board support, is recommending option number 1. In conclusion, we realize that this significant deficit is far from ideal and certainly was not anticipated by administration nor the board. Had we known in May what we knew in December, we of course would have made further changes from the beginning. Since its opening, the TLC has proudly boasted significantly high cost recovery levels, self-generating over 75% of revenues, which has been as high as 83%. However, in a year such as 2020, when the ability to generate these funds is greatly impacted, expenses need to be cut significantly more than if the approved cost recovery rate was lower. TLC administration maintained expenses at 67% of budget while trying to maintain service levels expected by members, program participants, and the public as a whole in an attempt to prevent further loss in both areas. As an example, had the approved municipal contribution been 30% rather than 22% in 2020, the budget would have been balanced at the end of the year. 2020 was a challenging year for everyone, and 2021 continues to be challenging, and we are using the learnings from the past year to form future decisions. That concludes my report, and myself and others present would be happy to try and answer council may have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Members of council, again, if you like to speak and ask questions or provide a comment, please text me so I'll have the order. But I'll start first. But thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative, and it is hard to deal with a year where it's a lot of unexpected circumstances that happen, and most like the town ourselves and the TLC are at the whim of both the provincial and federal government and trying to adjust and move around quickly to kind of adhere to the new requirements and regulations and protocols that are put forward to keep our community safe. So I understand that it hasn't been an easy process, but we definitely thank you for the work that yourself, your staff, and both the board has done to make sure that we followed all those protocols and made sure that our communities were safe. Going to questions, I have Councillor Laurie, you're first.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Lenny and Kathy, for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I do have just a couple of questions. One definitely is for you, and I think another one will be for our administration, because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, because I know we will discuss and debate this a little bit later. You mentioned about some of the significant losses that were seen or incurred with the second shutdown here from November to the end of December. Obviously, that shutdown continued into 2021, and your previous budget presentation showed significant facility and event rentals as a significant portion of the revenues for 2021. So when we're looking at this and we're looking at utilizing option 1 and utilizing the full operational surplus, bringing that down to about $69,000, I think was the number. I'm a little bit worried about what the potential risk for running a deficit again in 2021 will be. And I'm just wondering if, even though we're quite early days of 2021, if based on some of the changes that you've made in operations for these first 2 months and the loss of revenue that's already been felt during those 2 months, do you feel that there will be a high risk of further deficit for the 2021 budget?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie and rest of the council, certainly that's a concern of administration. We've already began, and even as early as December, when we realized that our projection, especially around the membership revenue and facility rental revenue, was going to be impacted into 2021, we did start to make revisions to the budget to try to balance that out, and we continue to do so. Kathy and I have met and will be meeting with supervisors in each department to take a look at that and find ways to reduce expenses continuously. We've taken steps, and we're in the process of taking steps to reduce our staffing levels per se. The first couple of months, we took a very significant reduction in staff. Once we knew that early in January when we came back and we knew that we weren't going to be open anytime soon, we reduced staffing levels beyond where they were in 2020 even. For example, the aquatics department, up until decision was made last week, there was nobody left, including supervisor and our coordinators, customer experience. Basically, the departments that had staff were the ones that were continuing to function. So in our wellness department, where we were running our online fitness classes, our preschool program, our operations, obviously we need to maintain the building, so our operations staff had some staffing there, but we made significant cuts. Looking ahead, we've made steps such as no COLA, cost of living allowance freeze for 2021 for our out of scope staff. We're also in the process of meeting with our union to open up our collective agreement for 2021 to ask them to take 0 rather than the budget or the forecasted 2.5%, which is in their collective agreement. So we're working with them to reduce that. So we are looking at ways already early in the year, like you said, Councillor Laurie, because we know that it is going to impact it, and who knows when things are going to be lifted to allow things like our trade shows and our surface mine rescue events, some of our bigger special events in the facility to take place. So we are already looking at that, and certainly we've got learnings from last year, as I said before. So we're going to do everything we can to get back to a 0 budget by the end of the year.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. And yet, Your Worship, if I may, this is to administration. So as we heard in the presentation, and as I've had conversations in regards to prior, the TLC, being a Part 9 corporation, was not eligible for essentially any of the provincial or federal grants available out there, with the exception of one of the, I believe it was the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Grant, which put us at a significantly challenging position because other fitness facilities that are privately owned were eligible for essentially all of those grants. However, as we see on page 95 of our package, our council package today, in the Q4 report, the town of Stony Plain received a COVID relief payment of $1.811663 million. I would also presume that the city of Spruce Grove and the county of Parkland would have also received this relief payment. Under a traditional sense, if a recreation facility was owned by a municipality, these type of deficits would have been considered, I would assume, in the use of that COVID relief payment that the town of Stony Plain and the other entities received. So I have a question to administration as to if there has been any consideration of some redirection of funds of the COVID relief payment that the town of Stony Plain received for 2020, and if not, why not? And then as a second question, we've had some early indications and understandings that the town of Stony Plain will receive or will show a operation surplus for the year 2020. And I'm curious if we can get an understanding as to what that potential operation surplus may look like, and if, again, there is any consideration of providing some of that operating surplus to the Tri-Leisure Centre to help offset this deficit.
Okay. Thank you. That's a good question. Maybe we can use that for a little bit later, unless administration wants to answer that now. That doesn't really have anything to do with the presentation here, and I don't think the TLC board can answer that at this point in time. Town manager?
Your worship, yeah, thanks for the question. Respectfully, I think that's probably a question to be answered during the call, if you want, the business portion of the conversation. So we can certainly answer that at that time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, if you can just mark that, and I'll come back to you when we're doing item 9.1.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will.
Okay. Moving on, next is Councillor Matties. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is along the same lines, but I'm just wondering the approximate dollar value of the grants that we would have qualified for if we had not been a Part 9 corporation. Do our guests have any information about potentially what was the opportunity lost in terms of financial support from the provincial government?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matties and rest of the council, I don't have a number for you because once we were deemed ineligible, we didn't spend time. Having said that, facilities similar to ours, similar operations who did apply and did receive it, received, I think, in the neighborhood of $300,000 or $400,000 in wage subsidy. So I think it would be fair to say that would be a minimum amount that we would have seen through that funding. But again, unfortunately don't have an answer for you at this time.
Okay, that's a good question, Councillor Matties. And maybe back to the general manager. I do understand that there was one recreational facility that was owned that did apply and was approved. Did you check into why that was and why the TLC was not?
Your worship, through yourself and the rest of council, we did have conversations with that facility who went ahead and applied. Both our legal opinion and from our auditors both deemed that we wasn't felt that we were eligible. We reached out to the granting body and it wasn't an easy communication. The risk, however, of being approved is that the penalty for having applied, received the funding, and then be deemed ineligible, not only would we have had to return the money, but I believe there is a 25% penalty on top of that. And when both our legal advice and our auditor's advice was that we were not eligible under the Act, we did not pursue it any further. And so I'm not sure what led that other facility to apply and whether or not they may down the road have a knock on the door and be asked for a repayment or not. But we respectfully followed legal advice.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matties, anything else?
No, that's everything. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Meyer had a question, but that was kind of covered and answered through Councillor Lowry's question earlier. So we'll move on to the next one, which is Councillor Bennett. Go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, TLC. So you are presenting this recommendation to all three councils, I think either tonight or tomorrow. And I'm wondering what, if all three of the councils do not agree on the recommendation, what's our next step?
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett and the rest of council, I believe the MOA dictates that any deficits do need to be funded by the municipalities. So in theory, it would mean that if this approach wasn't approved, one of the options, or using our reserves, then I believe that the municipalities would have to fund the balance from their own financial opportunities, whatever those might look like. But the MOA is clear that it is the shared responsibility based on the funding formula.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett, anything else?
No, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. One last time, any members of council that have any questions of clarity and understanding to the TLC? Okay, seeing none, on behalf of council, thank you very much for the presentation. I know it sure is not an easy task to decide and juggle what facilities, what events get to be open, who gets to be allowed in. You guys are just as reactive as we are, trying to make sure that we follow in line with the health protocols and the new procedures that are meant to protect our community. So definitely thank you for the hard work and dedication that you guys are doing over at the TLC for us.
Good. Thank you for your time, Mr. Mayor, and rest of council.
Thank you. Members of council, that ends our presentation. So that's it for number 4. Moving on to number 5 is statutory public hearings. We do not have any scheduled today. So moving on to adoption of council minutes. Item 6.1 is for the February 8th, 2021. I'm sure members of council have had the opportunity to read through it already. So I'm just going to ask Councillor Meyer to make the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council approved the regular council meeting minutes of February 8th, 2021 as presented.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meyer. Members of council, any errors or omissions on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, there's 7 hands in favor.
Thank you very much. Moving on to number 7, which is council boards, commission, and committee minutes. There's 2 today, 7.1 and 7.2, the Stony Plain FCSS and the TLC. Let's go on to Councillor Bennett for the motion, please.
I move the town council receive the council boards and committee meeting minutes for information.
Okay. Members of council, if you've had the chance to read them, any questions? And 7.1 deals with 2 minutes from December 9th and January, let me look at it, January 20th. Okay, Councillor Laurie, you're up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question either for the representative or administration in respect to the FCSS minutes. I noticed this on the last set of minutes that we had, and the trend continues. Wednesday, December 9th, there were 2 regrets, and on Wednesday, January 20th, there were 4 regrets. And I can't remember the exact numbers on the previous, but I know previous meeting minute agenda packages that came towards us had a high level of regrets as well. I'm wondering if there can be some commentary. I do have some concern around the number of regrets from this as to whether this is a direct impact of the transition from FCSS into a town department. And I'm also curious if the number of regrets have been so high, if the FCSS board considered looking at alternate dates and times for their meeting. I'm not even sure if on the January 20th meeting, if they actually hit quorum, even though I believe there were motions including the organizational meeting. So maybe some clarity on that, as well as if there was actually quorum on the January 20th meeting.
Thank you. Town manager, in terms of quorum for FCSS board meetings, and then just kind of a general comment on the regrets.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll actually ask our FCSS General Manager to provide any comment that she may have on the questions posed.
Thank you, Town Manager. Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie and the rest of Council. Yes, quorum was achieved on January 20th, and the regrets were due to a couple of pre-planned situations and a couple related to the major windstorm that happened the day before and people needing to deal with things at their residence.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Laurie, anything else to add?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Just something of note that we might want to keep our eye on as we move forward with the board turning into more of an advisory board rather than a governance board.
Thank you. Any other members of council on the 3 sets of minutes that we're accepting for information? Okay. See none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, there's 7 hands in favor.
Thank you very much. Move on to number 8. There's no bylaws that we're dealing with today. So move on to number 9, which is business items. First one up is the TLC. Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just ask our General Manager of Community and Protective Services if they would like to add anything further to the dialogue that was presented earlier to Council.
Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for the time this evening. Certainly the presentation is fresh from the TLC and the General Manager. They did revise their numbers based on their final audit number coming in a bit better than what we projected or was given to us prior to the submission deadline for this particular agenda item. The reserve, the operations reserve, is set aside for circumstances like this. Certainly, administration does also share council's concern with what 2021 will look like and some of the potential impacts of COVID-19 on the operations. And we do continue to work with the general manager at the TLC and his staff to ensure that this type of situation does not occur again. As you can understand and respect, the facility does have a lot of elements to it. I think every one of us in 2020 has some lessons that we have learned from a facility operation perspective as it relates to COVID-19 and some of the restrictions that have been placed on us through the provincial government. We do anticipate the restrictions with COVID-19 to slightly improve for us with the vaccination program that is currently being launched in Alberta, and some of the positive results that we've seen from the restrictions that have been in place since November of 2020. I think that's it, Mr. Mayor. I think if there are questions, and there was one question from Councillor Laurie that I know is part of the agenda package, so certainly can move forward with additional questions also.
Thank you very much. To the general manager, do I need to have Councillor Laurie re-ask a question, or can you answer it right now?
Your worship, it's a CAO. Yeah, I think just for clarity for everybody involved, just if respectfully, if Councillor Laurie can restate the question and we can take it from there.
Okay, sounds good. Councillor Laurie, you're first up with the question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to administration. And I just want to highlight that yes, we are having success with vaccination programs and that, but as of the Chief Medical Officer of Health's announcement today, they are not even considering the Step 2 movement until at least March 1st for a decision, and at that point it's likely to be at least a week. So we do know that unfortunately, even though we are moving in the right direction, a small blip on the radar has caused those restrictions to be pushed even further. And that brings me to a risk of concern for the 2021 deficit. What I will say before I ask my question is that I do struggle with the TLC having an independent operating reserve when any deficit is actually funded from the 3 municipalities. So I'm not necessarily opposed to us using the deficit or that reserve to cover this deficit at this point in time. But I would like us to maybe look into in the future how we should be managing this situation a little bit better. My question revolves around the fact that the TLC was not eligible for a majority of the subsidies out there and the grant programs out there from both the federal and provincial government because of the fact that that facility is municipally owned. One of the reasons that would occur was because the municipalities themselves were provided with COVID relief payments. The town of Stony Plain received $1.81663 million, as can be found on page 95 of today's agenda package. We've also been made aware that the town of Stony Plain will be showing an operations surplus for the year of 2020. Under traditional circumstances, I would expect that a deficit of a municipally owned recreation facility would have some of those monies allocated towards it. So I'm just curious if administration can refresh us as to what the COVID relief payment was allocated to and why the TLC was not part of the consideration for the COVID relief payment, or if it was partial as consideration for the 2020 operational surplus.
Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think to begin, just for clarity too, I'll ask our General Manager of Corporate Services to just again refresh or outline the general direction or specific allocations if she can do so, but for the use of the grant in question.
So to Your Worship and all of Council, so we did, as part of the 2021 corporate plan, know that we were going to receive the 1.8 most grant. And we are working through reporting to the province on what that was spent through. So we haven't final reported that, but what I can say is as we're reviewing that and reporting to the province, we do have in excess of 1.8 million in our own costs that would be eligible for those granting funds. As a reminder to Council, as part of the 2021 corporate planning, we had shown that to Council and given some options and recommendations of how that should be used or could be used, which council did proceed to approve. And most of it was used to fund debt into the future, just to give us more flexibility because of all the uncertainty around COVID. We do have planned to bring to council the surplus recommendation with our final projections in March, with the final numbers and the final allocations of how this all shook out. So it can give council a better picture as to that. But that's a brief overview of where the grant came in, sort of how it flowed through our process. And we did realize that the TLC was in a deficit. It's just a bit of a tricky one for administration as well, knowing that there is the other municipality partners that would potentially have to fund some as well.
Thank you very much.
Your worship, again, sorry, it's again the town manager, and I'll maybe add a little bit further on that. So I believe the general manager kind of crossed off the amounts and in a manner as to the process into where they've been potentially allocated at this point in time. You know, as to consideration, whether this was considered as part of that, or could be, or would be. I would, you know, to be clear to council, initially, no, it was not necessarily considered. It was, you know, we did look at, I mean, what would be considered direct town implemented costs and so on, and other potential strategies for use of the grant, I guess is one way to put it. As it relates to the operating deficit request and the reserve fund, and I would acknowledge that Councillor Laurie brings up a topic in and of itself about, you know, the rationale for a Part 9 to hold its own operation reserves and or even capital reserves for that matter. And that may be a dialogue for another day, but it is a dialogue that has occurred throughout, I believe, the history of the TLC at different points in time. You know, I think part of the rationale, part of the consideration, certainly from my perspective, Your Worship, is the fact that it is a jointly run facility. So, I mean, the decisions, although can be made individually, are made in concert with our partners from time to time. So, you know, this would be the first decision in a cascade of decisions that could flow forward. So, you know, ultimately, if the three councils elect to allow, so to speak, the TLC to use that operation reserve to fund their deficit, then that would make the rest of the conversation moot to a point. Again, if any one of the three, and I would just on that note, sorry, Your Worship, but I would acknowledge that I believe the general manager of the TLC was correct. Should any one of the three see fit to not pass this type of a motion, then it would just be at the those numbers would flow back in proportion to each municipality to fund in any way they see fit. It takes all three to allow that reserve to be utilized as I understand. So, Your Worship, I would further to this, it's further comment I would make is this does expose a bit of a lack of a better way of put it, Your Worship, a bit of a no man's land on Part 9 municipally controlled corporations, and that sometimes they fall in between the cracks, so to speak, on certain programs or grants or what have you. And I believe, you know, should council see fit or other councils see fit to challenge the provincial government on or the federal government on some of these funding programs, one of the comments you may hear back is that municipalities were funded through operating transfers for COVID-19. I believe that would probably be one line that we would hear from the other levels of government. Your Worship, at risk of rambling on, I'm going to stop there and just leave it at that and see if there's anything further.
Okay, thank you much. And that's a good conversation for council to have a little bit later. Next on the speaking queue is
Your Worship. I just had a follow up on that.
Okay, go ahead there.
So, thank you to the CAO and the general manager for the comments. And so, my comments further flow through then to the 2021 status and situation. So we are being told essentially today that the use of this reserve will bring this reserve down significantly to, I believe it was around $60,000 to $70,000 in total balance remaining in the reserve. We know that the TLC has already been hit with restrictions and other potential loss. So is there a way that we can plan, or is there something that administration is already doing? Because as you mentioned, regardless of a motion, any operating loss of the TLC flows through to the responsibilities of the municipality. And so that's something that we have to be prepared for, and we don't want to be an unwelcome surprise at the end of next fiscal year. So does administration have a plan, or is administration looking at a plan as to how we could potentially mitigate that situation from happening? Because frankly, we got lucky right now because of having this operation reserve. If the TLC did not have that operating reserve, we would be having an entirely different discussion. So I'm just curious to hear some on that before we move on.
Sure. I think administration can correct me or not, but I heard that there will be some presentation coming in March with the surplus from 2020, and at that time, council has the ability, I'm pretty sure administration will also put some dollars aside for debt and unforeseen circumstances, and as well, we as a council transact and move things to a operating reserve and a tax stabilization reserve, which will help fund a deficit from the TLC in the future. Administration.
Thank you, Your Worship, and yeah, some of your comments there ring true. I would provide a little bit further insight, I guess, in that I know that not only do our staff work closely with TLC staff on day-to-day or week-to-week sort of understanding of what's going on there, how it's looking, the entirety of the operating scenarios over the course of whether it be 6 weeks or 6 months or a year. And I know I would also suspect that the counterparts over in our other partners, Spruce Grove and Parkland County, we're often doing the same. And it's a testament to the TLC administration to work with 3 different municipalities on the potential operations of mitigating costs or trying everything that's possible to mitigate those costs. I think though that what I would point out, and this is both a strength and a challenge with the Part 9 and the governance of the Part 9, is that at any given point, this administration, Stony, Plains, Spruce, or Parkland County are not able to direct the TLC. Only the board can do that. So we can work as close as we can with the staff over there, which ultimately and often results in very good things happening. But ultimately, it's the board that controls their budget, their spending, their decisions, open, close, so on and so forth. So I believe the communications are very much in line and ongoing. I know that the general manager and his team over there often give us the heads up when they see things shifting and so on, and that's appreciated. But to the direct question of what can we do exactly, other than be aware of the risks and as they present or change, having some flexibility to that risk, that's where we're at for now. I'll stop there, Your Worship.
Thank you, Town Manager. Moving on to Councillor Matthews, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. My concern truly goes to 2021, but potentially even beyond that, for any circumstance where if we had a pandemic or a crisis that would require a closure of a facility for an extended period of time, and it goes back to the funding that's available from us as a municipality to ensure that that entity is supported. And so going to the specific replenishing of reserves, like, do we as the town of Stony Plain have a reserve available that we could hold funds or build funds up for situations like this? Because it's quite concerning. I mean, if next year we have, or 2021 we have the same situation, and then all of a sudden we're in a significant economic downturn, I just want to know that we're able to financially support this entity moving forward.
Okay, that's a good question, Council Matthews. And I think, you know, as a council, we're allowed to use the tax stabilization reserve for something like this. I'll just ask the town manager or the general manager to provide comment.
Thanks, Your Worship. A couple comments I'll make, and then I'll certainly open it for our General Manager of Corporate Services to speak a little bit further if she wishes. So I think, you know, there's a couple, I guess, thoughts or comments that come to my head with that particular question. On any given, what I would say, quote unquote, normal year, you know, I mean, I'm confident that we have the ability within our existing reserve structures to accommodate, you know, I mean, a certain percentage swing. And if we're talking specifically about the TLC, a certain percentage swing of operating deficit. I think, though, the provision that the fact that the TLC has its own operating reserve, again, you know, I mean, that going back a number of years, that's, you know, I mean, that was directions from the municipalities over a number of years to try to, you know, keep those things in check too. Whether it's held over there or over here, you know, it's still considered a portion thereof, so to speak, to move these, to soften these challenges. At the risk of an overused term, you know, I mean, clearly COVID-19 has brought out some big numbers on deficits, whether it's TLC here in the tri-region or transit commissions and so on and so forth. And I think as a, you know, broad-based public service, we're all trying to come to terms with, you know, the best way to mitigate these severe and specific impacts, while, you know, frankly, having our eyes open to the potential down the road of something happening again. Maybe it's 4 years or 5 years from now. So I'll stop there. If the general manager wishes to comment on any of the specific reserve aspects, I would ask her to do so now.
I would just add to all of council that, and I think the mayor alluded to this as well. So the surplus, 1/3 of the surplus will automatically go to the tax levy stabilization. So I do see us having some flexibility into 2021 if things like this continue to arise. I mean, I think it is a good question for council to think about, and we have, we're working on a reserve policy it's time for the 4-year update to come to council later this year. And, you know, none of us would have anticipated COVID-19 happening. And so how do you plan for that into the future? It's a good conversation to have. There's no perfect answer, but it's definitely put, I think, on all of our radars a little bit more. So look forward to that discussion a little bit more with council, you know, as we bring you some more benchmarks and some more information, and you can provide some more direction to us if the policy is sufficient or we need to look at it later on in this year.
Thank you. Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. My friend Councillor Laurie here has asked my question once again, but I do have another one. I do see option 2 that the TLC admin had brought to us was to use some of the capital reserve to cover some of this deficit. First to administration, is it? Can I assume then that the capital reserve is not restricted just to capital expenses, and that if we assume that next year turns out to be just as difficult, that using the capital reserve would be an available option for next year?
That's a good question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I may ask our General Manager of Community and Protective Services to speak a little bit further to this. The one comment I'll make prior to that, though, and certainly the General Manager can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, most of anything related to the financials or reserve use of the TLC requires all 3 municipalities to be in agreement. So I'll stop there, but just laying out that all 3 of us have to agree to any sort of reserve use. And General Manager, if I'm wrong, please say so.
Thank you, CAO. Certainly, Councillor Meyer through the chair, Mr. Mayor. that could be an option if all three of us chose that option. And certainly, I think just like the mayor has illustrated with our own reserves and the GM of corporate services, the board can make a decision about their own reserve statements and accounts and can allocate them for different varieties through a motion. But as the CAO has indicated, that's step one. Step two is to have all three municipal owners accept and ratify that recommendation from the board. So the three of us can't have three separate opinions. Otherwise, then it defers back to the municipalities covering that deficit in whole through our own reserves or our own accounts or our own funding options.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Can I just have a quick follow-up to that one then?
Sure, go ahead.
And again, going back to the TLC's admin's presentation earlier, they did briefly mention a lighting initiative that they expect to see some of it returned to that reserve. And having sat on the TLC a couple of years ago, I know that there were asset management plans to cover upcoming expenses. So I guess this would be a question to admin or maybe the member on the board. Is there any other expenses that we should be expecting that would eat up a lot of that capital reserve?
It's a good question. That would be directed to probably the board member, which is Councillor Bennett, or maybe even Councillor Laurie might have some insight, as he was the previous appointee to the TLC board. I'll start with Councillor Bennett. Anything on the, 2021 capital campaign budgets for the TLC?
Mr. Mayor, they have they've been doing regular maintenance since I joined the board in October. I've been very impressed with the upkeep. I remember a few years ago we had an air exchange fail, and it was quite expensive. And so I think that's been an objective of this board for the last few years, is to make sure that never happens again. So I know there was some ice refrigeration maintenance going on. We have replaced most of the flooring in the swimming pool and in the change rooms. The lighting has been a huge investment, and it's almost finished, but just winding up. Those are the things that come to the top of my mind. I think that I can say that as for asset management and being on top of a capital plan, the Tri-Leisure Board has certainly been on top of it. So yeah, perhaps Councillor Laurie can add to that, because he was on the board for several years before I, but those are the things that come to the top of my head, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and I'm glad you mentioned the air exchanger. And at that time, if I recall correctly, I think they did come to the three municipalities to fund that instead of coming from the reserves. I don't remember if we chose to use the reserves or we funded it through municipal operations. Councillor Laurie, anything to add in terms of 2021 capital projects that would be kind of funded from the capital reserve from the TLC?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Nothing that I'm aware of that would be funded from the reserve. If you recall from the budget presentation, there was some capital savings realized from 2020 with a few projects. One of that being the track. Instead of a full resurfacing of the track, there was a different program that was used. And so instead of increasing the capital ask for 2021, they actually rolled that surplus over because one of the major projects for 2021 is, as Councillor Bennett alluded to, the arena chiller and heat exchangers, as well as a natural gas refueling station for the Zamboni. And those are projects that were identified high on the list. And essentially they're projects that you can't delay, because the second you delay that project, and for instance, if the ice plant were to fail mid-season, it could take a significant amount of time to get that back up, which would significantly affect their programming and the availability, which would hurt their revenues. So nothing else aware of in 2021. The Tri-Leisure has a great capital plan process in place, but looking at that reserve and knowing what's upcoming, given that the facility is starting to get to that 20-year mark, we certainly will be having a lot more discussions about the capital requirements of the TLC in the years to come.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie, and thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Meyer, anything else?
I have one more question, but I'll take a break and let some fellow councillors ask theirs.
I do not see anybody else that has messages, so I guess you can go with your third question. Go ahead, Councillor.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient? I was just hoping that administration, so to help me understand, as the CAO had mentioned, the cascading effects. My concern would be we drain this reserve this year, next year's similar in its outlook, and then we are making decisions to, as we've sort of this year, where we've worked with organizations to sort of shut down seasons and call them short and all that kind of thing to keep a lid on expenses, which for 1 year, I mean, we all have witnessed sort of the pent up troubles that presents. I could only imagine what it would be like after 2 years. So, so like I say, if administration could help me understand, you know, if we drain this reserve this year, will next year mean making tougher decisions in terms of programming?
Yes, the general manager or town manager.
Yeah, Your Worship, maybe I can make a couple comments there, I guess. I don't know if I would call them specific and hard and fast answers necessarily, but yeah, there's no question that there are still potential challenges going through 21 on the operating side. You know, I mean, on our own end, we're dealing with that and trying to predict or be ready, so to speak, for changes that may come up. And how would we go about putting in different programs or altering programs or so on and so forth. So, I mean, that challenge is real. It's probably even more real to a degree at the TLC with the inherent expense of operating that place, frankly, with or without people coming in the door. You know, how can we, or what do we do, or how do we manage that? You know, that's a challenge that we have. I don't know that I can give you a clear answer on that. What I would say, you know, when a question about draining the reserves, I think one thing to bear in mind, and it can be a bit of an odd thing to hold in your head at any given time, but I mean, although the TLC is separate and it's a Part 9, you know, I mean, the three municipalities are shareholders and owners. So, you know, the reserves that sit at the TLC, in some ways you can look at them, I mean, that's essentially just municipal money that's sitting in their reserves, could just as easily be in ours. You know, do we want them to spend it? Do we want to spend it on our own? It's sort of the same dollar. It's coming from sort of the same place on these sorts of decisions. So what's the best course of action? You know, I believe as the board has put forward, and as I think is the support of the municipal administrations of all three municipalities, is to, I mean, go this direction. Everyone will have to do their level best to manage, oversee, consider the operating challenges going through 21. And frankly, you know, I mean, see where we end up moving through, whether it's by June, July, you know, probably have a better idea and plan from there. So, Your Worship, I'll stop there. I don't know if it's not a clear or hard and fast answer, but I guess it's more thoughts around that question.
All right. Thank you, Town Manager. And just I'll provide some comments to Councillor Meyer. Yeah, it is a possibility, but that possibility will be decided on by the TLC board of how much of the reserves that they need to use and if it does come out of capital or not. So when there is going to be a deficit as they're finalizing the 2021 budgets and there is a deficit, well, then that's up to the board at that time to decide if they want to use it out of the capital reserve or come to the municipalities for funding of that reserve deficit. And then us as the 3 municipalities have the choice of funding it from our reserves. So that's how the system will come down. Councillor Bennett, any clarity on that?
I don't know if I have any clarity on that, Mr. Mayor. It was pretty clear to me. The comment that I just want to make, and maybe this is towards the end of our discussion, I think tonight we have 3 options in front of us. And if we can't, and we have 3 municipalities that have to make the same decision. So if we choose one that the other 2 municipalities don't, well, then we're down to one option, and that is that we fund it. So in reflecting on this, this recommendation that we have before us tonight, the TLC has a board, and on that board are 3 municipal representatives. And this was debated among those representatives. And this was the recommendation that we came to. So just from that fact alone, I think that we should go with the recommendation. I think that that is probably, I mean, I hate to put it in gambling terms, but I think that's the way to go on this. Otherwise, we lose all options altogether. Because if we can't agree, then it goes back to municipalities have to. So, you know, just think about that. You have representatives, they have discussed this, they have come to a recommendation. And so that's a pretty good bet that the other 2 municipalities will also agree on the first option.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. And I think those were kind of closing comments. But we were just asking questions of clarity and understanding. But since you moved that way, I'm going to ask you to make the motion, Councillor Bennett, so that council can talk about it and debate it in further detail, please.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I move the Town Council approve the transfer of $503,037 from the TLC Operations Reserve to fund the 2020 operating deficit.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, members of council, I'll open up the floor for comments, debate, and etc. on this. I think we heard some clear questions of understanding and clarity. I'll just wait to see if anybody comes in before I provide some of my comments. Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this brings an important point, an important topic that needs to be talked about, and we've touched on it a couple of times, and it's about the reserves that the TLC holds and why the Part 9 holds these reserves, and in a way, what type of policy should exist around that. You know, we have to remember that these reserve funds, essentially, that the Tri-Leisure is currently holding, are municipal dollars. They're, you know, the Tri-Leisure runs on a cost recovery basis, and it's the municipality's responsibility to cover what they don't recover. And so in no situation should there end up actually being a surplus at the end of the year, because as the municipalities, we should only be responsible for covering that operating deficit. So the reality is that this money is money that the municipalities have spent based on past budgets. So thankfully we had it in there, so it's going to be less impactful to us at this time, and that's why I'm, you know, fully in support of using that operating reserve right now. But I do think that as the 3 owner municipalities, there should be a conversation that occurs, because there come times where we need to look at our reserves and what we need to use our reserves for. And had we have had a situation where we had another area of the town in which we could use, you know, our share of this, which would maybe be $250,000 approximately, that would have helped offset something, you know, that can make a huge difference. And so, you know, as we talk about I think we had the same conversation around the library, and the library holding a reserve when it was a town-owned entity. And so maybe that's a conversation that has to occur with the 3 Part 9 partners in developing a policy around reserves, is maybe independently each municipality needs to have some type of a reserve or assume the liability, which we do already by the Part 9 agreement in whole. So appreciate what this brings to light tonight, and that I really hope administration will bring forward some more of these conversations about this, so we don't end up in a future situation where we don't necessarily have this to rely on.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Laurie. Any other members of council? See none. I will support the motion at hand. I do believe this is the best course of action, as mentioned by Councillor Bennett earlier. The TLC is a Part 9 company that is owned by the 3 municipalities. There are 9 representatives that sit on the TLC board, 1 elected official from each municipality, and 2 non-elected officials from each municipality. So you had 9 people that thought about this, debated about this, had the conversation to see what was the best for the TLC. And this was the recommendation, was to use the operating reserve that was there and held in books, and that is exactly why the operating reserve is there. Town of Stony Plain has an operating reserve because sometimes when we do budgets, things come under budget, and sometimes there's a surplus and we get a grant from someplace else that allows us not to use the municipal funding, or, you know, saves dollars on the cost of expenditures. And in terms of the way I see things, it's good budgeting to put some of those surpluses into a reserve that can use it at a time when there is not, especially like this. None of us could have predicted that we have been closed almost a year now in terms of what's happening with the pandemic and all the rules and regulations that we have to abide by now. So it is good that that there is some money in a reserve held by the TLC, so that we don't have to go back to a residence to raise the dollars to offset and pay for the deficit. Especially not at a time like this when most of us are hurting in terms of with the economic crisis and the COVID-19. But it does bring a good question, as Councillor Laurie has mentioned, that you know, how much should be held in reserves by which organizations. So that's a topic that maybe council needs to dive a little bit deeper into. And as mentioned by the general manager of corporate services, that the reserve policy for the town of Stony Plain is due. It's about 4 years old and is due for review. So I'll look for that conversation with the rest of council. And that is a good question to ask: is how much does the town of Stony Plain need to hold in reserves, and for what? So with that, I will support the motion, and I think TLC is doing an excellent job. So thank you very much for that, Councillor Bennett. Since you brought the motion up, would you like to make anything closing statements?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's all been thoroughly covered.
Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor, use your raise hand button. If you're not in favor, please don't raise your hand, and then that way our recording secretary will count that.
Mr. Mayor, I see 7 hands in favor.
Thank you very much. That's passed. Moving on to 9.2 is the council policies review. Administration, go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll hand this over to our General Manager of Corporate Services for her and/or her staff to speak to further.
Thank you, Town Manager, to all of Council. So you've seen a few updates coming from each of the various areas, and we continue that trend for some guidance from Council tonight around some of our corporate services policies. As you can see, some of these policies are quite old, and they were, you know, we had done a thorough review back in 2018 and 19 and brought a lot for Council to repeal at that time, and these were left for further review. And as we look at them today, feel that they should be repealed by council, and I can walk you through the recommendation on each one. We've also included within the lead sheet in front of you tonight, just the definitions of the council policy, which really focuses on those governance programs and standards of performance for the town versus what an administration policy is, which is more focused on the operational matters. So the ones in front of you tonight are an over and non-budgeted expenditures policy back from 2000. As well as the FOIP coordinator from 2001. Both of these we feel are covered now through the CAO bylaw that council had passed back in December. So a bit of a cleanup item based on the passing of that bylaw. The vehicles policy was from 2008 and really spoke to how those vehicles are managed by administration. And so feel that council can repeal this, and we do have administrative policy that will follow that and guide the employees as to how those vehicles should be used within the town. And then the last two are the subdivision and development appeal board minutes and municipal planning commission minutes and agendas. Both again are quite old, 2001, and are either covered through our procedures internally or for the MPC. I mean, that commission no longer exists, so is no longer a policy needed around that. And we've attached the old policies for council's review. If there's any questions around how these are dealt with or any further clarity that I can provide, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you, General Manager. So members of council, any questions of clarity and understanding from the presentation? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask the Councilor Plechko to make the motion so that we can debate it. Councilor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council repeal council policies 1 through 5 as stated on this policy review.
Thank you very much, Councilor Plechko. Members of council, any questions and debate on the policies that are recommended to be repealed? Councilor Mattis, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have one question of clarity with regards to the first two policies that are being repealed. It basically says that they are now covered by the CAO bylaw. And I'm just wondering why, when we set up the CAO bylaw, that applicable policies were not removed at that time.
Administration.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Mattis, it's a good question. I would just say it's a miss on our part, so I do apologize for that. When we were doing our review, it was identified that those should have been brought at the same time, so that would be a better practice, and we will aim to do that for future.
Thank you. Councilor Mattis, anything else?
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Loy, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And I think this is a continuation of things that we've been doing over the last several of our council meetings, you know, cleaning up the old policies. I bet you if we look back at our notes and stuff like that, the last 2, if not 3, we've been doing similar. And I really like what our senior administration is doing, is taking the time to look and get rid of some of these things that sit on the books. It's like an old law that sits way, way, way back there that's just really not applicable anymore. So I'm in favor of this. I'll be voting for it because it's a continuation of the cleanup. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, see none. Thank you. I will be supporting the motion. It is, as Deputy Mayor mentioned, it's clean up some of the old policies, and I just appreciate that. I'd actually like to challenge administration to do a more intensive job of cleaning up our old policies and bylaws. I was talking with a mayor of Cold Lake a little while ago, and one of his stipulations was that if administration brings a new policy or bylaw to council, they have to actually bring one to remove or rescind at least one. So that makes administration work a little harder to figure out what is relevant and what is not. As you can see from members of council, we have policies from 2000, 2001, 2008, 2001, 2001. So definitely well overdue in any terms of adequate review. So I do look forward to having more of these come through as we clean up our own bylaws and policies. With that, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Please use your raised hand. If you're not in favor, just leave it down. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I see 6 hands in favor.
Okay, 6 hands. So Council Plechko is not in favor of
No.
repealing.
Sorry,
That's
Councillor
Councillor
Meyer.
My hand is in favor.
Okay, sorry, on my screen here I see Council Plechko's hand and Councillor Meyer's hand is down. Okay. Okay, so that is corrected. So it's 6-1 and Councillor Meyer was opposed. Thank you. Move on to 9.3, which is the 2020 fourth quarter report. And then it also includes the fourth quarter report of Stony Plain FCSS. So go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as council has seen before, quarterly operating report contains some of our previously communicated public numbers or updates. Certainly forms the basis for go forward sort of update and communication on what the town has been up to. Your Worship, with that, as you noted in this particular one, our FCSS quarterly report is included. Moving forward, it'll be fully integrated into the remainder of the operations report. Your Worship, as per usual, I will stop there, keep that short and sweet, and certainly myself or the team can clarify, answer questions, or speak to any of the matters contained within the report, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of council, definitely we had a chance to review them. There's some great information out there and very, very well done in terms of in depth of what was happening. Again, matching pictures to storylines. Great work to our staff. And so I'm going to open up the floor for any questions of clarity and understanding from members of council. Okay, seeing that there is no questions of clarity and understanding on that, I'm going to ask Councillor Mattis, please, for the motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the 2020 fourth quarter report and the Stony Plain Family and Community Support Services fourth quarter report for information.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mattis. Members of council, any debates, questions regarding the motion? Okay, see none, on behalf of council and our residents, thank you very much, administration, for another very informative quarterly report. I think there has a lot been done over 2020, even with a global pandemic and the stuff that we're limited to. It's great to see some of our projects continue to move full steam ahead to make sure that we provide a better quality of life for the residents. With that, I'll call a question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, I see 6 hands in favor, and Councillor Plechko, I just can't see.
Okay, I just see a,
Now there's 7 hands in
On-
favor.
On my screen, it shows my hand is raised.
yeah, this is the wonderful technology that we have. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we always get to the bottom of it. Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe I could ask administration if they could see how that new underground cable is coming to the community that I live in within our community.
Oh, I think you're waiting for a long time for that, Councillor Pletchko. Okay, that's passed. Moving on to information items and council discussion. So this is the time for council to provide any updates or some information that they'd like to share with administration as well. We'll start with Deputy Mayor. You're first to ask. Up, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and nothing really. I've enjoyed the last council meetings, and I've enjoyed our webinars and our team things on Teams. I find them extremely informative. It's really because I would say of COVID, we've been forced to look further down this road and explore it better. And I think it's been advantageous to us all. So if you get like say a webinar or something on Alberta policing that lasts for several hours, it's things that we're getting in a timely fashion that we don't have to wait for. So I'm really happy with the way how things are going and to all how everybody's participating. That's it.
Yep. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Moving on to the previous Deputy Mayor, Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not much this evening, just a quick question to administration, given the beautiful shift in temperatures in the right direction, in my opinion, that we've seen over the last couple of days and as forecasted to continue. Do we have public works crews that are going to start going around to clear and thaw out the storm drains to help get rid of the melt that is beginning to occur? I've noticed we have quite a few places that we're starting to get some significant pooling and buildup with nowhere to go.
Good question. And it's usually earlier than usual this year with the definitely +8 weathers that we've had the last couple of days. Administration?
Your Worship, I'll maybe just ask our General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure if he can comment at all.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie. Yes, if there's ponding water, then our crews will be out to address it. I'll check in tomorrow to find out how it's going out there. But yeah, it is a little early, but yes, we will be looking for ponding water.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, so we had the Deputy Mayor, the previous Deputy Mayor. Now we're going to have the future Deputy Mayor, as you can see on the lead sheet. Councillor Meyer, you're next.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to take a pass this evening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Matties.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of comments that we started our business visitations with the Growth and Commerce Committee and had the opportunity to meet with the Stony Plain Brew Company this last week. So always getting some good information from our businesses. And then secondly, I attended the Emerging Trends in Municipal Law Summit, and good practical information provided, whether that was on watercourse management, tax incentives, and case law examples. And I'm just wondering, does administration attend that summit as well?
Administration.
Your Worship, it's the town manager. I will say I didn't attend this one. I have attended theirs in the past. I can't speak for everybody else on their senior management team, but I know depending on timing and availability and so on, but I know administration does attend those periodically, a handful of us or a few of us on any given time.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councillor Matties?
That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pletchko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Nothing this evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pletchko. Councillor Bennett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple things. First of all, I've been getting texts that It's kind of smoky out there. Does our administration know anything about an abundance of smoke in the air?
I don't know.
Your worship, I don't myself personally. I'll just maybe give a 10-second open comment to any member of the senior management team or staff that's on if there's something that we're aware of.
No, your worship, not. Oh, sorry, Trevor just got back to me. There's a permitted fire happening in town for sure.
A what?
A fire that has a permit.
Ah.
So the fire department knows about it. They've issued a permit, and it's being conducted appropriately.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Matters, you had your hand up?
Yes, Your Worship, it's behind Maple Leaf Homes, that area. They're burning brush.
Okay, thank you.
And then second,
Anything else?
Yeah, please. So Thursday, the provincial budget will be announced, and I'm wondering if administration is going to provide us with a summary of that and when we can expect that.
Your worship, certainly appreciate that question. So yeah, I know the budget drops on Thursday. I believe that there's what would be considered some updates and webinars that council may have received invites for Friday. I believe there's an AUMA one and an Alberta Council one I think I saw as well. So, I mean, over the last couple of years, that seems to be the trend that as soon as the provincial budget drops, there's a number of different stakeholder groups, so to speak, provide some overview and commentary that way. So, we'll ensure that council gets that if you don't already receive it through mailing lists or newsletters or so on. What we will try to do, I would expect us to be doing is, even funneling it further down from there. What does it mean specifically for Stony Plain, if anything, and what does that look like? Frankly, Your Worship, I know in the past we probably did a bit more of that, and I'm talking even in my career 10 or 15 or 7 years ago. Now, some of the groups get that information out so fast that they just get it out there quicker than we can, and that's a good thing. So we will make sure you receive that. Anything specific on Stony Plain that we see or are aware of, I would commit to having that update to you, by the following Monday, and at the latest.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else, Councilor Bennett?
No, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think just gonna tag on to Councilor Lowry's comments about the storm drains. As you know, with the warmer weather, snow is melting off the road. So again, exposing potholes. Make sure that our staff are aware of that and on the ball to make sure that we address those as soon as possible. Also, I received a few complaints about the slipstream off 16A. It seems to be quite a large pothole. I know that's not our road, it is the Alberta government's Alberta Transportation. So I was wondering if administration has heard any comments or concerns or kind of complaints from our residents regarding that.
Your Worship, I don't know that I have or can say that I have not personally heard of those. I'm not sure if some of other ones have come in, but I know we can reach out to Alberta Transportation and have them take a look as quick as we can.
Okay, thank you. And talking about Alberta Transportation, I'm just wondering when does our administration expect to get kind of an overview of the timelines for the Highway 779 completion? I know this has been going on for quite a few years. It is not our project, it is Alberta Transportation's, but I'd like to continue to be aware of the timelines so that we can share that with our residents.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll ask our General Manager of Planning Infrastructure if there's anything he can respond or add to at this point.
Your Worship, thank you for the question regarding 779. So as I understanding, the schedule is being developed, and it will take a substantial amount of the summer for completion. But we will be providing the community with information as it becomes available through discussions with Alberta Transportation and their consultant.
Thank you. And those are all the council information items of council discussion I have. So that finishes that. So moving on to number 12, which is a closed meeting. So council is going to closed session. The meeting is not recorded or live streamed for public viewing. The motion to revert back to public meeting is the only motion that is entertained by council. And once we're back into an open meeting, then we'll allow anybody that wants to continue to watch what's happening. They're welcome to. And there you go. So on the screen before you, there is an email address. So if you would like to be notified when council is coming out of closed session, that is the email address that you would use to contact our staff, and our staff will give you a 5-minute heads up when we're finished. Okay, with that, I need a motion to go into closed session. Deputy Mayor, please.
Yes, Your Worship. I move the town council move into closed session to discuss per FOIP section 21, 12.1 governmental regulations.
Okay, thank you very much, members of council. Ladies and gentlemen, so before I call the question, just to let you know, FYI is when the question has been called and been counted. Before we go into closed session, we're just going to take about a 5-minute recess. So we allow the members to move in and out that are supposed to be in closed session and those that are not. Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, I can see 6 hands in favor with, I just can't see Councillor Bennett's vote.
Okay. Oh, I just saw it pop up.
Okay, 7 hands in favor, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to close session. Again, we're going to take about a 5 to 8 minute recess first so we can get everything in line. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to our council meeting. We had a 12.1 conversation on government relations. According to FOIP section 21, the motion to move out of camera was made by Councillor Matthews, and that was passed unanimously. Administration, we put an email there for any members that were watching that needed to be notified if they wanted to come back to open session. Has anybody been notified or left an email?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have confirmation from our Manager of Legislative Services that nothing was received from the public about notification coming out of closed session.
Okay, so with that, then I can adjourn the meeting. So that's 13th. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your good comments, questions, and conversation around some of the topics that we've had dealt with. Administration, thank you for getting the agenda package for us. I look forward to seeing some of the highlights from our fourth quarter 2020 throughout our social media channels so that we can share with the residents of what's happened over the last quarter. With that, thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. Have a good day, guys.